All
right.
right.
Hello, Knox. I am Pastor Amy Snow, and this is MaryAnn McKibben Dana. You may have read some of her books, but she is a friend of myself and my husband, and she does pop culture pastor hour with my husband. And I'm always cracking up at some of the things they talk about. But this morning, we are going to talk a little bit about Sabbath because that is what we are delving into at Knox. And we are going to talk a little bit about Sabbath in the Suburbs, one of Marianne's books. And it's been a couple years since it was published. And a couple of things that we're going to talk about are the book, but also some of the things that she would add since it was
Mhm.
published. You said that in 2022 it was out 10 years,
Yeah,
and you've been thinking about doing a new edition, but you've been doing a few other things.
that's true. That's true. I
Yeah.
had a book that came out that year, which was called Hope, a User's Manual, and then I
Yeah.
have another book that came out just a couple of months ago, which is I think
Yep.
is over my shoulder
Yep.
here. Better than normal. And I actually write about Sabbath in that book. We can maybe
Hmm.
talk about that a little bit because, yeah, when I wrote the book, my kids were little. So my oldest was maybe 10, almost 10 when it came out. So 10, 7, and 5, I think were their
Uh-huh.
ages. And that is an age where, as parents, we have a lot of more influence over our kids' comings and goings. And so
Yeah.
when we decided to take this practice seriously and say, what if we could set aside one day each week where we weren't going, striving, doing laundry, all of the things that constitute work
Hmm.
in our world. Um, we did that with full awareness that at that age, they aren't involved yet in umpteen activities. So it was an easier time in many ways to build that base of rest and play and just being
Hmm.
together as a family. Um, and as I would talk to people, because I led events and things after the book came out, people were like, how? How on earth? And I would have parents of teens who would come up to me and be like, yeah, you'll see.
Yeah.
And because it does get a lot more complicated when, especially, sometimes we can, as parents, encourage our kids beyond what they're interested in because we want to give them lots of opportunities to learn about themselves and be part of teams and learn instruments and all of these things. But they also enjoy it. And so
Hmm.
I would get people saying, well, are you telling me to tell my kid that they can no longer do
Hmm.
lacrosse that they absolutely love? And I would always say, I'm not here to be the Sabbath police. I'm just here to tell my story of someone who was feeling so burned out and feeling that the expectations of our culture that were just getting their grips into our family and our kids and saying, we need to live a different rhythm. And so this was an
Hmm.
experiment that we tried for a year. And after that year, we started doing it differently. Had to be more flexible with what that looked like, but it really did plant some seeds, I think, for our kids as they grew and as they continued. They're young adults now. And so, yeah.
Hmm. We didn't do anything quite that intentional, I think, but we did make opportunities to focus on being together as a
Mhm.
family. And when they were little, like you talked about, that was a lot easier
Yeah.
than as they got older. I I instituted something that we called triple F events, fabulous family fun.
Love it.
But the kids quickly called it forced family fun.
Yes, I love it. Well,
But,
yeah. And one of the things that I tell people, and I'm not sure this is in the book, is that what we call something does matter. I mean, I love the labeling that you gave it. And so one of the things that I would say to people is, what are the things that bring you life, that bring you joy, that you
Mhm.
do not because they're going to produce some result or get you somewhere. And just slap the name Sabbath on that and see what that does for you. And
Hmm.
some people would bristle against that because they're like, well, Sabbath is supposed to be God focused. We're supposed to be in prayer,
Hmm.
devotional reading and all of these things. And that is not the way that many Jewish communities think of Sabbath keeping. I mean, yes, there is a worship involved. There's a ritual around the table with blessing the bread and lighting the candles, but it's also a day to play. It's a day to delight in one another and just say to yourselves, we are not stuck in this system of commerce and producing. We can pull out of that and be free. And so what we call something matters. And so for people who are like, how do I even start? If you've got what was the first F that they turned into forced?
Fabulous family
Fabulous
fun.
family fun, right? So what does it do? In fact, there's a wonderful social scientist, Ellen Langer, who talks about the power of language. And she says she has a couple of studies that she had people like read comic strips and
Oh.
tell what's the message of the comic strips. And half of the group was told, this is your work for this study is to do this. And the other half was told, we're going to play with these comic strips, right? And even just that subtle naming, the
Mm.
people who are working at it had a much less fun time than the people who are like, let's play around and tell me what you see in the comics. And so there's another study that she cited, which was people who clean hotel rooms, so maid and cleaning staff. um, Half of the group was like, you're getting exercise while you do this. I mean, you think about what's involved in cleaning a hotel room. You've
Hmm.
got, to push the big cart and you've got the vacuum cleaner and all of this.
Hmm.
And then the other group was a control group. And they found that the people who were like, oh, we're exercising here, they actually had better physiological outcomes. Like their blood pressure was lower, just some basic
Hmm.
things, just by thinking, oh, I'm moving my body. I'm not just working. I'm engaging in physical activity. So I always use that as an example of sometimes you don't need to radically change your life. I mean, sometimes we do. The book was really about a radical change that we needed to make. But if that feels like not the season that you're in, then
Hmm.
fabulous family fun is also your Sabbath time together. And just see what
Yeah.
changes about it to just have that label
Yeah.
alongside something you're already doing. Maybe you become a little more aware of God's presence, or maybe it just has a different quality to it, or it doesn't. I mean, this is all experimental. So,
Yeah.
anyways, those are some,
Well,
so you
and
you all were doing it.
yeah. Well, and I mean, there were other things that we did that just kind of evolved. Like we would have jammy days
Ugh,
where
love it.
we just were in our pajamas all day,
Yes. Mhm.
and that really limited the kinds of things we do.
True.
And it was fabulous. So
Yeah.
you're in a totally different mindset when you're in your
Mhm.
pajamas all day.
Right.
So,
Yes, absolutely. That's a great, yeah, just some kind of marker. And
yeah.
and when I first got interested in this, I was serving a church that was full of young families that were kind of going through the same thing we were, in the sense
Hmm.
of like life feels overwhelming. There's always more to do than we have time to do. And usually our answer to that is just to buckle down and
Hmm.
just, put our nose to the grindstone, right? To use that old cliche. And so we were trying to help people understand, we have this spiritual practice that's very, very old, this
Hmm.
very old technology of a pattern of rest and work. We're
Hmm.
not meant to work without without those patterns of rest in them. And so we instituted this thing called the Sabbath Project, which is we got groups together. We had a meal at the beginning of like an 8-week period, and we were like, we're going to talk about what would Sabbath look like for you and your
Hmm.
family, or you and your spouse. Like,
Hmm.
and it could be for some people, it was we're going to walk the dog together on Saturday sometime during the day. Like that is what we have to walk the dog anyway, and we're all going to go.
Mm-hmm.
Other people, it was a Wednesday evening, just making sure everybody was around the table together for family dinner because they were doing the soccer and the,
Mm-hmm.
orchestra and this and that. And whatever it is, everybody defined it for themselves. And then after that time, we kind of blessed everybody for this experiment. And we didn't meet, we didn't talk, it wasn't like a Sabbath study
Mm-hmm.
group. It was just a go out and try it. And
Mm-hmm.
I would kind of send out little weekly, like how to go, like, and just, or a little quote, just something to kind of remind people.
Mm-hmm.
And it really, I think it really opened people up to the idea that it's not an all or nothing thing. It's not
Yeah.
like if I
Yeah.
can't do the whole day, then what's the point? There's,
Yeah.
that don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, as they say,
Yeah.
right? So, yeah.
Well, like Sabbath is not a Sunday thing
That's
because we
right.
work on Sundays.
Yes.
And so I think of Sabbath, I've thought about Sabbath snacks during
I
the
love
week
that.
where I have time for like a bit of Sabbath here and a bit of Sabbath there because sometimes I am working on Saturdays and I can't take a
Hmm.
Saturday. Like this
Hmm.
coming Saturday, I'm super excited. I'm going to be at Pride, but it will be all day and it will
Yeah.
be exhausting. And
Yes.
then Sunday, I will be at work, which
Hmm.
is really wonderful and also, work. So
Yes.
I think about how do I during the week find small moments of Sabbath so
Hmm.
that I have rest
Yeah. Yeah.
in the midst of the work and the productivity.
Hmm.
And so I've been trying to think about that. And we had talked about maybe being outside during this, conference today, but
Yeah.
it's been raining. And
Yes.
I was going to be like next to the hammock in which I like to
Mm,
read, but
yes.
yeah, it's soggy, so that was not
Yeah.
a thing
I
to do
love that.
today. But
And that's I think those kind of calendar touchstones where I mean, I have
hmm
found that what was good about the experiment of just a year of like and ours was on Saturday because yeah, I was
hmm
serving a church. I serve a church now and
hmm
was that
hmm
back then. And so yeah, Sunday was a work day. So Saturday was our day to our do nothing day, which was not
hmm
nothing. With when you have little kids, you're always,
Oh
I mean,
yeah,
like, the place was a wreck by the end of the day because we were just had all the blocks out and the board game, the Legos and everything.
yeah.
But but to weave it into your life more,
hmm
I think is what I'm hearing you describe. And I think that's
Yeah.
so, so important. If you're feeling, I mean, where all this started was just a yearning that my husband and I both had to like live differently, to help our kids pay attention to their own needs and limitations,
hmm
to know
hmm
when it was time for them to stop. And I will say, because people would always ask, well, what's it like now? Your kids are older. They're pushing against their parents in a really important way and being wanting to be
Oh
independent, right?
yes.
And so mine don't talk in the language of Sabbath, but they are all in their own ways very tuned into I need rest now. I've got, oldest is 23, is graduated from college. Second one is 20 in college. Third one's 18, still figuring out, just graduated from high school and is maybe we'll call it a gap year, but sort of figuring out what's next. And
hmm
they all are way more than I was at that age, like
hmm
listening to their bodies and like, oh, I need a rest. They're great nappers. They have honed
Yeah.
that gift, and
hmm
I'm still learning how to take a good nap because my mind is still going even when I'm tired on the weekends and other times. But yeah,
Yeah.
so it's something that's
Well,
taken hold.
I am not a person who sits still terribly easily.
Hmm.
And so I find that sometimes the contemplative life eludes me. My husband is
Hmm.
definitely the contemplative of the two of us.
Uh-huh.
And so I find setting some kind of time bound something
Yeah.
helps me.
Hmm.
Um, Baking bread for me
Mm,
is a gift because there are times in which you have to set a timer and let the bread rise.
yeah.
And
Ugh,
so, um, allowing that to be a time in which I can paint or reflect or read or
mm-hmm,
knit, those
mm-hmm.
kinds of things are life-giving for me, and they are
Yeah.
a way that I can pray. Um,
Mm-hmm,
Knitting or sewing or painting are ways that I find creative outlet for the spirit,
mm-hmm.
I think.
Yeah.
Um, but it's time bound, so I don't get antsy because then
Mm-hmm.
the timer goes off and I have to
Yeah.
knead the bread and get it, ready to proof
Yeah.
again or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So things like that have been
Yes.
helpful for me. Um, a lot of friends talk about meditating or things of
Mm-hmm.
that nature, and it makes me feel like there are ants crawling under my skin.
Yes. Right. Right.
And I have tried the
Yeah.
apps and I have tried the things, and I have determined, with the blessing of my spiritual director, to understand that that is not for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
but there are so many different disciplines that we have,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so many rich, deep spiritual disciplines that sitting in prayer is not the only thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that that is what most Christians tend to think that we have to do.
Right. That's such a good point. And and one of the things when I lead retreats and talk to groups, I'm always interested in what the connotations of Sabbath are. And I think
Hmm.
they
Hmm.
are, if people even know what that term means, there is a
Yeah.
stereotype, I guess, an image of somebody sort of piously quiet and still and at prayer. And I think especially when you're talking about uh, children and engaging in this practice with children, it's very active. I mean,
Mm.
your fabulous family fun was, I'm sure, boisterous, in many ways.
Yes.
And I think also I'm following someone lately who's been writing a lot about what we understand about neurodivergent brains,
Mm.
and
Hmm.
there is this sense that silence is for some excruciating because it's not when you see somebody kind of fidgeting or even knitting, those repetitive
Hmm.
motions, it's not a distraction or a lack of settledness. It actually is deeply settling for certain kinds of people who,
Hmm.
once you sit and you have to be still and quiet, it's like your brain just kicks in. And so I have really been thinking about what does spiritual practice look like in a more neurodiverse community where
Hmm.
we expect silence and stillness is holy.
Hmm.
And I mean, we have fidgets outside of our sanctuary now because we have not just kids, but other, grown folks who are like, I just do better when I am playing with
Hmm.
something. And you could look at that and be judgy and be like, why can't you sit still? And it's like, well, I want to be more present here, and this helps me be present. So
Hmm.
that's one of the things I love about Sabbath is it's not one size fits all. And for some people,
Yeah.
Sabbath is very solitary, and that's great, and others it's very social, and so it can be
Hmm.
the beauty of it is it can be what you want it to be. The challenge also, I mean, we were talking about this before we started recording, you know, as Christians, we don't have a lot of infrastructure to make this practice easy. I mean, if you're Jewish, it's kind of built in and baked in. Not that everybody practices a full Sabbath
Hmm.
day of rest. I think I read a statistic when I was researching the book that about a third of the
Mm.
Jewish community really takes what we would call a full day kind of Sabbath. But there are prayers for it. You bake the challah bread the day before. I mean, there's
Yeah.
this whole tradition around it, and we don't have that other than the Puritan kind of don't do anything fun,
Yes.
and just kind of, and that,
Yes.
so we just don't have a lot of social support and social structures. And so
Hmm.
it's hard. And I really want to name that for people who are like, I don't even know, how would I even incorporate
Yeah.
this into my life, to acknowledge it is hard.
It's funny that you said that because I kicked off the summer by talking about Sabbath. And I talk about being like a Sabbath, like a reluctant Sabbath person because I'm like a Sabbath failure. And I talk about as a kid, I read all those Laura Ingalls Wilder books and
Yes.
about how she's like, I hate Sabbath and all of the stories around that.
Yes.
And I retold some of those stories because
Mm-hmm.
that's what I think of Sabbath when I think of Sabbath. I think
Mm-hmm.
of like sitting on a hard bench, like
Yes.
just being still and stern
Mm-hmm.
and whatever,
Right.
and no fun or joy. And I
Yes.
don't think that's what it's supposed to be
Mm.
about.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
when you were talking about like isolation or not isolation, but solitude,
Mm-hmm.
versus social. And I was
Yeah.
thinking it's interesting because I think of Jesus pinging back between those two
Mm.
polars,
Yeah. Yes.
Jesus, I imagine that he could be the life of the party,
Mm-hmm.
telling stories. I imagine that Jesus was a master storyteller, all the
Yeah.
parables and those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
But then I also see that he needed
Yeah.
solitude to kind of regain. So he was like an
Mm-hmm.
ambivert, like a person
Yes.
who needed time away to regather himself
Mm-hmm.
and reground himself in God. But then also to like really help people see the fullness of God, the
Mm.
joy and the
Mm-hmm.
love, and to
Yeah.
experience that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that, Jesus is God. And
Mm-hmm.
so that side of Jesus, the being in the meals and being with
Mm-hmm.
people and sharing wine and
Yeah.
bread and food. I mean, that's Sabbath too.
Mm. Yes. Amy, I had never made this connection before, because my second book that came after Sabbath was about improvisation, and it's like, what do we do when life doesn't go according to plan?
Yeah.
And I wrote that book as someone who really, I would rather have a plan. I want my backup plans to have backup plans. I don't consider myself a natural improviser, and yet this is what we have to do in the world because plans fall apart, right? But one
Yeah.
of my favorite stories as I was researching that book of Jesus is the turning of water into wine, right? And Jesus,
Mm.
this is his very first sign in John. And I always use it as an example of Jesus improvising because he didn't intend to do that. Like his
No.
mom comes to him and says they have no more wine. He's like, this is not my
Yeah.
deal. And then he realized, no, I can give something here. I can take part in this. And
Yeah.
your this example or what you just shared really it that could be a Sabbath story too. Like
Hmm.
we're here at a wedding, and people are having a good time, and I want that good time to continue. And
Yeah.
if the wine runs out, people, I mean, we often sort of talk about that story as like he helps the host save face, right? Because it's very
Yeah.
embarrassing to have the wine run out. You're not good hosts. And yeah, maybe that's there. I know that was part of that culture, but also like, let's just keep the party going, you know?
Yeah.
So thank you for naming that. And I do think that that's what's beautiful about Sabbath is it's both. He also fell asleep in that boat, right? And is like,
Hmm.
I just need to check out and rest, even with the storm coming. So
Yeah.
he shows us the pattern. And
Yeah.
thank you for naming Laura Ingalls Wilder too, because there are such funny little snippets from those books, right? Of Mary, her older sister, who just looks so holy, and
Oh,
she
yeah.
talks about like, oh, she just, and Laura's like, yeah, ready to crawl out of her skin. So
Yeah.
relatable.
Yes,
So
absolutely. Oh
yeah.
my gosh. Well, and as we were planning for this summer of Sabbath, and as we were thinking of, how our families at Knox would receive this, and would it be another thing they'd have to do, like
Yeah.
another thing? Like we certainly didn't want to burden people. In fact, it was
Mhm.
the opposite. We wanted
Mhm.
something that would be freeing and life-giving and permission-giving.
Mhm.
Um, and yet it's kind of hard,
Yeah.
um, because it goes so against our culture.
Mhm.
And the thing that I'm realizing more and more is that in order to live a Christian life here in the US, we have to really be countercultural.
Hmm.
And sometimes that's really hard to do,
Hmm.
um, especially when signups for travel soccer come around
Yeah.
or different things like that. And so many of us want our kids to have everything.
Hmm.
And yet at the same time, we also want them to be well rested and to
Right.
be creative. And
Hmm.
I'm very aware that having kids who are creative and know themselves requires periods of boredom and
Hmm.
space. And
Yes.
so how how do we do all of those things, you know?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, the power of boredom. I mean, there's a lot of boredom in Sabbath,
Yeah.
and what that calls us to do is to sort of, I call it spiritual puttering. Like sometimes when I would just be, I'm like, what do I need now? I want to sit and read a magazine for, and then when I'm done with that, I'm like, I'm sort of kneading the bread or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, just go where your delight takes you. And if
Hmm.
someone is programmed sort of within an inch of their life, they don't learn to do that.
Hmm.
And I also want to really acknowledge how hard that is to live that more countercultural, or to realize that some of the things we do are
Hmm.
countercultural, and that parents, um, we are, especially if we are within a certain class, with certain advantages and privileges, we know what it means to help set up our kids for the good life, right?
Hmm.
Very good schooling, take the most challenging courses that you are able to, so you can get into a good college, so that you can, so that
Hmm.
you can, so that you can, so that you can. And that comes from a good impulse. Like that's,
Hmm.
and so I resonate with and sympathize with folks who are like, this isn't gonna serve my kid in the world that we live in. No one's
Hmm.
gonna, no one's gonna congratulate you and pat you on the back for setting a good boundary around your own self-care. We are called to always be available, I mean,
Yeah.
technology, I think, was billed as something that was going to make our lives easier, and now it just piles more expectations on us, of like
Hmm.
always being, like we have our phones, which is supposed to be convenient, but it just means that people can reach us at any time. And
Hmm.
so that's a whole separate topic of how do you handle technology, thinking about Sabbath. But anyway, the so it's very challenging. And also for some folks, you just come to the point where you don't have a choice. Like your body's going to tell you, like,
Yeah.
this isn't working anymore. This unrelenting, and I've been very upfront in my later writings about my kids who have struggled with mental health in their kind of later adolescence, and they're all in really good places at the moment. But some of that was burnout,
Hmm.
that came from just the constant kind of flow of activity. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, it's a challenge, and it is countercultural. So that's why it's helpful to have communities like Knox, even though there's a little bit of, what is this? There's still just kind of people learning about it, but at least it's in the culture conversation. Because if
Hmm.
you're doing this on your own, it's
Yeah.
really, really difficult. So having some friends and having some, a church community or a spiritual community that can walk with you, and that is really important.
Yeah. I think
Um,
about it like swimming upstream,
yeah.
so
Yes.
that you've got like a school around you so that you
Hmm.
can make your way, or
Yes.
like the geese that fly in formation and the
Exactly.
ones in the back are encouraging the one in the front that's bearing the brunt of breaking the
Yes.
wind,
That's
and then they
right.
take turns doing that. And I
Yeah.
think that's what our community of faith is supposed to be like for us,
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
if we're really trying to do this Christianity thing and this
Hmm.
following Jesus thing, it's not easy.
Yeah.
It's
That's
really
right.
not easy.
Right. Right. And yet
Yeah.
the possibility on the other side is a deeper level of freedom that we can feel. And this is something that I wish I had been more explicit about in the initial edition of that book. And I actually, this is what I mentioned in the most recent one, is we sometimes look at Sabbath as kind of this individual practice, right? It's
Hmm.
about me and my own self-care and a good kind of healthy rhythm. But if you look at, and this is coming from the work of Walter Brueggemann, one of my professors at Columbia, he wrote a lot about Sabbath. He
Yeah.
passed away in the last couple of years, but it was not just a pause so that you can go back to work. It
Hmm.
is kind of a complete reorienting of your life to be reminded that, how it all started was the people of Israel were slaves under
Hmm.
Pharaoh, right? And so after they move out of that enslavement, they are given this gift of Sabbath, which is not just one day out of seven we get to rest, but it was a proclamation. It was a testimony. We are free. We are not enslaved by Pharaoh anymore.
Mm.
And that's part of what Sabbath is too, is to say, we have our jobs, we have our work, we have our volunteer stuff, we have our caregiving of kids or maybe parents. Um, and we can easily feel captive to a system that feels too big for us to change. And
Hmm.
we just need to live by the rules of the system because, as you said, swimming against that current is too hard. And the gift of Sabbath for us, I mean, it changed a lot. Like I moved to a part-time position in part as a result of what we learned about ourselves and what brought us joy. And that, came with consequences. But it also has set us free in so many ways to live differently and to, so I think some of the resistance to Sabbath is an awareness that it's going to change us. Like our priorities can shift.
Hmm.
And it's kind of a be careful, don't even open that
Hmm.
door because change. I mean, I think it's been attributed to Flannery O'Connor, who says human experience, I'm paraphrasing, resists grace because grace changes us and change is painful. So those of us who are kind of, I just don't know if I can do this, I think that's a testimony to the idea that Sabbath
Mm.
will mess with you in all the best ways, the way God messes with us,
Mm.
But be ready. So and ultimately it's liberating. It's been liberating for us, but I get why
Hmm.
you're like, I don't things are working fine enough. I don't want to mess with
Hmm.
the, something so fundamental. So,
Wow.
yeah.
I love that. I think it's true. We do resist grace. Um, and I know of so many people who would rather um, be those who offer grace than receive it.
Yeah.
But that is powerful that we resist grace because grace will change us and
Hmm.
change is painful. And
Yeah.
all of those things are so true. And
Hmm.
wow. And maybe
Well,
that's why Sabbath
yeah.
is sort of daunting and frightening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think too that it does communicate to if we do have little kids or even kids who
Hmm.
are more grown, is it communicates that we have needs too. And that can be hard
Hmm.
for some parents, like I need I need some rest.
Hmm.
And so how do we honor that our kids need us to be a good grounding presence and to feel like, parents are setting good boundaries and are kind of in charge and there's a reliable container in which I can learn and grow because my parents are dependable adults who kind of know what they're
Hmm.
doing, Um, and so to say, part of knowing what I'm doing as an adult is like I
Yeah.
have limits and I
Yeah.
reach my breaking point too and need. need some space and need,
Mm,
I can't go and go and go all the time. So
yeah.
it is a teaching tool as well as something that I
Yeah.
think I have really needed. So
That
yeah.
is such good stuff. Ah, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and for sharing your thoughts in your book.
Thank you.
This is wonderful. And, Knox people, if you have any questions, MaryAnn and I are going to chat again in a few weeks. And yes, I wish you all um, some happy Sabbathing and may your time be blessed and holy.
Amen. Thanks,
Amen.
Amy.
Thank you so much.